So I'm going to spend some time talking about the CPA licensure process. So, everything that goes into becoming a CPA aside from the exam, which Mike will cover after me. So there are 4 parts to the CPA license. We call it the 4 E's. There's the education, the experience, the exam, and then as Mike already mentioned, in a number of states, there's an ethics element to it. So starting with the education, you have to obtain 150 credit hours of education in order to become a licensed CPA. That's generally the equivalent of 5 years of full-time higher education. Some jurisdictions will allow you to sit for the exam. In fact, many jurisdictions will allow you to sit for the exam with 120 credit hours. So that would be the equivalent to a 4-year bachelor's. I know obviously in India, it's a 3-year bachelor's. So you would still have to do some kind of further education to get to that 120 credit hours for sitting the exam. But you would still need the 150 credit hours, regardless of your jurisdiction, in order to become licensed. Within that 150 hours of education, there is going to be, for most jurisdictions, around 24 credit hours of business and around 24 credit hours of accounting above entry level. Particular courses, there are some jurisdictions that do require specific courses, maybe a statistics course, something along those lines. If you wanted to find out a specific jurisdiction, what they actually are looking for in the education, the NASBA website has a page for every single jurisdiction that really details out exactly what the requirements are for that jurisdiction. Next, you have experience. Generally, it's 1 to 2 years of experience. So depending on what jurisdiction you're working under, you need to have 1 or 2 years of experience working under a US licensed CPA in order to get sign off. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, since we are aware that in India, it is sometimes more difficult to get that experience under a US licensed CPA that can sign off for you. As I mentioned, Mike's going to speak to the exam. And then the 4th fee is the ethics. Many of the jurisdictions require an ethics component. That is effectively an at-home course that you would take. It's like a 4-hour course. You'll sit and watch some videos, go through some slides, and at the end, you'll take an exam. As I said, it's at home, so it's an open book exam, and you will get a certificate. It's generally an AICPA ethics course. You get a certificate, you send it to your jurisdiction. I believe you generally have around 12 months even from getting your license to complete it. It's not something you necessarily have to have done as you send in your application for licensure. And once you've completed all of those things, you are a bona fide CPA licensed in the US. So the exam process itself, it's generally the same for international candidates as it is for candidates in the United States. You have to establish eligibility through the particular jurisdiction that you would like to sit with. I'll mention later, but there are certain jurisdictions that are more international friendly. Some do require residency. Some require a social security number. So obviously there are ones that you might want to avoid. But I'll also talk about the services NASBA can provide to help you with that. Once you've selected your US jurisdiction that you want to complete your license with, you're going to send in your application to them with your required fees. They will go through the process to determine your eligibility to sit for the exam. And then once they've determined, yes, you're eligible, you're going to get a notice to schedule from them. The process to get your notice to schedule really does depend on the jurisdiction and honestly how busy they are at the time. Sometimes you can get it in a matter of days. Sometimes it might take a few weeks. Be patient. NASBA is always at the end of the telephone as well, or an email if you're looking for an update. But this notice to schedule is going to be the most important thing that you have. It's going to have your exam ID on it. And that exam ID on your notice to schedule is what you have to take with you to the Prometric Test Center when you're sitting. If you don't bring that with you, you're not going to be able to sit. And if that happens, you'll have to pay another fee to reschedule your exam. So bringing your notice to schedule with you on the day of your exam is the most important thing for you on the day of your exam. Never forget that. So as I said, you'll get your notice to schedule your exam with the Prometric Test Center. Mike already mentioned there are 8 Prometric Test Centers now in India that are available to you. And then you'll write your exam and receive your score generally between 2 to 4 weeks after you sit the exam. You're going to get your score back. So the NASBA actually has a candidate bulletin. They release it annually or as changes are made to the exam and the process. It's going to give you all of the information that you could possibly want, from, you know, application right through to preparing for your exam and right through to what to expect at the Prometric Test Center on your exam day. I would recommend you read it. You can get it at nasba.org /exams/CPA exam. It is actually something that when you apply to sit your exam with your jurisdiction, you're going to have to attest that you've read it. So it is something that is worthwhile, you know, getting ahead of and reading as soon as possible. So NASBA actually has an international evaluation service, since they are fully aware that you know, there are a number of international candidates such as yourselves who are going to have transcripts not from the US. So they provide a service to help you out with that. There are other companies that provide international evaluation services. I will say, if you're planning on using one of those other services, just make sure in advance that your jurisdiction does accept evaluations from them, because certain jurisdictions will only accept an international evaluation from NASBA. So you don't want to go through the process of paying another company, sending in your evaluation, and then finding that they won't accept it, because then you'll just have to go through NASBA and pay them as well. So make sure that you check that out in advance. So NASBA's International Evaluation Service, basically, every jurisdiction is going to require that your education earned throughout the United States, as I mentioned, has been reviewed for equivalency to US standards. So what will happen is you'll actually submit your credentials to the National NASBA's Evaluation Service, and they'll complete an initial documentation check, just make sure that all the documents you have are there, confirming they're authentic. And then they will send them to an evaluation team who will create a specialized credential report. One of the nice things about this service is, if you haven't decided what jurisdiction that you want to sit with, they do actually have an undecided jurisdiction element. So normally you would say, I want you to evaluate for Alaska. But if you're not sure, then you can check the undecided box and they will say, we think you're most suited to these jurisdictions. So specific to India, after you apply for your international education, you're going to have to send your documents. The requirements specific to India is you're going to need your annual or semester mark sheet, which includes all of the courses you've taken and all of the attempts that you've sat. If your university is only issuing a consolidated transcript, then that's fine. But you do need to make sure you send that. You'll need your degree certificate, and that should be your convocation certificate. If you've completed all of your final exams within the 2 years of your application to the NASBA's International Evaluation Service, then you can provide a provisional degree certificate. That would be totally fine. Your university is required to issue and attest your degree certificate. An autonomous college can issue the marks and transcripts, but if you're at an affiliated college, the affiliated college is not permitted to issue those transcripts. You'll have to get it from the overarching university. You know, obviously NASBA does realize and recognize that sometimes it's difficult to get some of these documents. Sometimes it's hard working with your specific experience to provide the documents. So they are willing to work with you. One thing they recommend is when you're doing your initial document submission, do send in the syllabi for all of the courses you've taken. Oftentimes they request that as part of the evaluation. So it makes sense to just send it up front and then they have it and they can work with you. But as I mentioned, they do understand that oftentimes it's hard to get documentation. They will try and make the process as easy as they can for you. And make it smooth for everyone involved. They want to help you get through this. So they're not going to try and, you know, make it difficult for you. So you can send your documents via airmail, or you can also send most of them via true copy. Generally, the documents will need to be sent by the University Registrar of Exams. Just one thing to note is if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to the NASBA International Evaluation Services. They will be able to talk you through the process. So as it relates to the education requirements, I already mentioned upfront, it is 150 credit hours for licensure, but most jurisdictions will allow you to sit with 120 credit hours. So that would be a 4 years bachelor degree. Obviously, we know in India, it's generally a 3-year bachelor degree. So it would not be considered equivalent, which means the chances are you're going to have to do some kind of additional postgraduate education, like a master's degree or an advanced diploma in business administration, or even the chartered accountancy qualification. But each jurisdiction is different. It's worth looking up on the NASBA website just to learn more about a specific jurisdiction you might be looking at. Certain jurisdictions we know to be international friendly include Alaska, Montana, Washington, Pennsylvania, Guam. What that really means is they don't have a social security number requirement. You don't have to be a resident of those jurisdictions. And we know that they generally are more accepting of international applicants. NASBA does actually have a accounting licensing library that you can sign up to for $10 US a day. And it basically tells you all about those more international friendly jurisdictions. Tells you, you know, is this jurisdiction one that allows you to sit in an international location and the like. And then, as I already mentioned, NASBA does offer, when you do your international evaluation, the undecided jurisdiction element. So you can say you're undecided and they will make a recommendation based on your individual education. So as I mentioned, when we were talking about experience too, part of the experience process is getting a US licensed CPA to sign off on your experience and say that, yes, you do meet the experience requirements, whether they be 1 year or 2 year, depending on your jurisdiction. Again, NASBA understands that this is sometimes more difficult for international applicants. And as such, they have put together an experience verification service. What that really means is once you've passed the exam, you've met your education requirements, and you believe that you've done your 1 to 2 years of accounting of experience that would, you know, be required to be signed off on by a US licensed CPA, you can apply for this experience verification service. It's worth noting there are a few jurisdictions that will allow a chartered accountant to sign off on your experience. The NASBA website should be able to provide more information specific to your jurisdiction as to whether or not you fall under one of those situations. But for the experience verification process, effectively what happens is you would meet with a NASBA client manager. They'll guide you through the process. You would jump on a Zoom call with them, and they will actually talk you through what experience you've done, what you've been working on for the last year or two, what kind of clients you've worked on, that kind of thing. And they will decide based on your conversation and also based on some verification that they will do, you know, to back up that what you're saying is true. They will decide whether or not they feel that you meet the experience requirement. Assuming you do, they will issue you and your jurisdiction a letter stating as such. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're directly reporting to a US licensed CPA. It can be that you can go through this process and, you know, detail the experience that you've had and get the verification that way. So continuing professional education is kind of the final piece. Once you're a licensed CPA, you do have to do a certain amount of continuing professional education each year. The reporting period varies depending on jurisdiction. Some, I know my jurisdiction, I have to report every 2 years. Some are every 3 years, but it generally works out to about 40 hours of continuing professional education each year that you have to complete. Most firms will actually provide you with that, regardless of whether you're a US licensed CPA or not. If you're working for, say, the Big Four or Grant Thornton in India, they will actually have you do that much training during the year, regardless of whether you're a US licensed CPA or not. But you do have to attest to your jurisdiction once you're a US licensed CPA every 2 or 3 years that you have met that requirement. So as we speak about, you know, actually US CPA exam testing in India, Mike already mentioned that there are the 8 Prometric test centers. You can see them listed on the left side of the screen. And he already discussed the fact that it is now continuous testing. So you can pretty much test, you know, 6 days a week, aside from national holidays, but it's pretty open. You must, in order to test in India, be a resident of the countries India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, the Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka, or the USA, which I'm sure would not be a problem. And then these are the other countries where you can test if you choose to. So you can also test in these countries. And, you know, oftentimes people find that maybe they're working in a public accounting firm, they have to travel for work, and they're like, well, I'm going to be in the UAE anyway for this, and I've already prepared for my exam. So you know what, I'm going to sit it in the UAE rather than waiting until I get back to India and sitting in India. So you do have options available to you. You're not just going to be restricted. I did mention when you're looking at your jurisdiction, make sure that you're selecting obviously a jurisdiction where you can test in an international location. You don't want to find that you're confined to having to go to the USA if you don't want to test, but you have options available to you. So these are some of the more frequently asked questions that we are asked by international candidates, especially those in India. So the first one, should I pursue the US CPA instead of the Chartered Accountancy of India? We're not here to promote one over the other. Honestly, they have different needs. If you're going to be working for a Big Four or a multinational company, or, you know, a top 10 public accounting firm that have clients that are based in the United States that are reporting in US GAAP and US GAS, then, or you work in a multinational company which also is reporting under US GAAP, then the chances are doing US license makes the most sense. But if you're working in, you know, a local public accounting firm in India or a national company in India, then the chances are chartered accountant makes more sense for you. So it really just depends on what you want to do with your career. We're not here to say that one is better for you than the other. How much does it cost? There is an international fee associated with taking the exams in India. So you will have to pay an extra $357 per section to take the exam in India. And then deciding on jurisdiction, again, this really comes down to your individual background, your individual education. And as I mentioned, there is the undecided jurisdiction evaluation service that NASBA International Evaluation Services provides. And then there's also that accounting license library that I mentioned that NASBA has, where you can go in and learn all about the jurisdictions. But honestly, the NASBA website has a ton of great information too. As I said, each of the jurisdictions has a webpage on there that tells you more.